Okay, hello everyone and welcome to today's event. I'm Jason Gumpert from MSDynamicsWorld.com and I am joined by Mike Goldenberg and Andrew Waters of MineralTree today to talk about integrating AP automation and Dynamics GP. As we get started, please know that you can add your feedback and ask questions during today's event. You can use the Q&A block that you should see to the right of the main presentation window. Mike and Andrew should be leaving time at the end for your questions. And without further delay, I am going to welcome Mike Goldenberg to start things off.
Thank you for that introduction, Jason. Do appreciate everyone's time today. We'll try and be short, sweet, and to the point, and hopefully, leave you with a lot of good information to consider and think about, as you're considering, whether or not to automate your AP process. But even more importantly, if you are planning to, how to go about that and, how we've seen people be successful. And myself, Mike Goldenberg, I head up both our direct as well as partner sales here at MineralTree, and my associate Andrew, who will come in and help us out on the product side at the end of the presentation, is on our product management team. And for those who may not be entirely familiar with MineralTree, just as a quick background, we were founded in 2010 and actually really proved out the product and the security and all those things through actually bank channels. So our product was originally white labeled through banks like Silicon Valley, City National, Square One, and a handful of others. And since that time, we've really expanded the product quite drastically from, business payments and kind of being focused on that to going much deeper into the invoice to payment process. And over that time, we've worked with companies in, a wide variety of areas, everything from, and this is just kind of an interesting list of some of the 500 plus customers we have, everyone from Lionel Trains, who make the little toy trains, who's a great GP customer, as well as, some really innovative high-tech companies, as well as, people in the communications and media space. It runs the gamut, but really it's anyone that's looking for, help above their accounting system to automate their AP process and take out a lot of that manual work. And so today we'll talk about kind of big picture a little bit, to start off, and then really dive into the, why you would go about doing this, and the helping you frame the problem that's being solved, more of the detail of how this is going to impact the business itself, and then in how you're going to make the change, as well as ultimately, what you end up with on the other side. What is the outcome that you're striving towards by automating these processes? And so, just a couple of hopefully, humorous things. One of the things that we hear in terms of the challenges of bringing automation to AP is, that people are obviously incredibly busy as is, and it can be really difficult to, have that time to stop and make changes. I would say the large majority, we focus on what we would call small enterprise, mid-market companies, typically people doing, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 250 million in revenue. Really anyone doing 100 payments or more is where you start to see, some significant value in automating this process. But we certainly understand that you are very busy, and that is one of the bigger challenges here. But, as we go on, we'll talk through, how we make that a little bit easier for you and what you should look for in general to make that process easier. And so just a little kind of helpful hint, I would say, in terms of directing change and really having change. There's two things. There's a great book by Chip and Dan Heath about, how to make big picture changes. And, just at a high level, I'm certainly not going to cover the whole book here, but it's about three things. It's about reaching people at an intellectual level, and, it's making that business case in terms of the dollars and cents. It's, what they would call motivating the elephant and getting people at an emotional level to actually understand the value and why it's important beyond just the numbers. And as important as anything, it's, shaping a path for people. It's providing clarity in terms of how it's going to be done and a clear plan. Otherwise, people, very quickly turn back or resort back to the way they've done things. And, there's a great framework in terms of communicating from this guy, Simon Sinek, and a great TED Talk if you ever have the chance to watch it. But, he talks about the difference between great communicators and most people is most people talk about what something is, and then they tell you how it works, and then finally they get to the why. But at the end of the day, great communicators start with, here is why this is important, here's why we're going to do this, and then they work their way down to how it's going to work and then what it will actually result in. And so, whether you're talking about Steve Jobs or the Wright brothers or Martin Luther King, they all shared this kind of style in common. And so certainly, I think these are just some very small things that hopefully help you as you're, working your way through the process to, get buy-in from the other people within your organization. So the why, and obviously incredibly important here, this question, if we were to be able to free up 50% of your time from doing AP, what are you going to do with that time? I can't tell you how many times we talk to people and they say, oh, we'll figure out something. Oh, trust me, there's plenty of things for people to do other than AP. But what we find at the end of the process is, if you don't have a good answer for this, if you don't have more valuable things for your staff to be doing, then you can pretty much ignore the remainder of the slides here and the rest of this webinar, because if there's not a driving force that's going to really push the organization, and if this doesn't fit into a greater the organization in terms of efficiency and putting people on more valuable things than data entry and paper, filing papers and things like that, then it's, regardless of what the numbers tell you, it's going to be tough to justify this kind of change. And so, certainly as we go through this and even beyond this presentation, I would, push on you to really think, what am I really going to have people doing when I save this time? Because, as I mentioned, we do focus more on, smaller enterprises. It's not, the pitch is not, you've got 14 people doing accounts payable, now you're only going to have 4. In many cases, they're not looking to fire someone. There's a small staff and, you're really just trying to reallocate time. So, this is the most important thing to figure out before you even, start getting into the how you're going to do it and what it will look like in the end. So when you think of the, the vendor payment process, the invoice payment process, from invoice capture through approving the invoice itself that the goods and services have been received, through the payment authorization process, with the CFO or CEO or whoever else is responsible for releasing the payments, and then into the payment execution. This is just a very short list of the things that go into that process. But the point is really that when you think about it, those things really add up. And there's a lot of great research out there that breaks down these costs for people. But, at the end of the day, when you put it all together, and we'll go through the details a little bit later in the presentation of how you'll get to these numbers, but to process an invoice and pay an invoice, on average, depending on, how best in class you are at this point, you're looking at $15 to $25. And I know that number kind of shocks people or, throws them off a bit. And again, we'll show in more detail how that comes about, but it truly is a very a costly process to pay your bills in itself. It's often inconsistent and risky in some ways. There's a lot of manual entry of data. There's a lot of tracking things by email and Excel sheets. It's very difficult, when you've got check stock and things like that floating around to, really have control of your payments and making sure that, there's no sort of internal fraud going on. And then lastly, of course, having different payment processes for checks, for ACH, for wires, for credit cards, creates, confusion, or not even confusion, but it's more time consuming to bring it all together, especially at the end of a month or quarter or year, to really have visibility and consistent visibility to your outgoing payables. And so for the different people in the organization, for the different roles, certainly there's going to be different advantages. And you want to, whether you're a CFO trying to communicate to the rest of your staff, why you would be doing something like this, or if you're an accounting manager trying to, move this up the priority list, with your management team, you're going to want to obviously point out different things for different people. For the CFO, they're obviously going to be more concerned about, efficiency of the staff. And one thing, people don't talk enough about is the morale of the staff. I mean, if you're doing, data entry all day long, it's certainly not going to be as fulfilling as if they're actually, spending time doing what they, perceive to be more valuable things to the organization. And certainly the peace of mind of knowing and having better control through digitizing and centralizing your process is not only going to make your life easier from an auditing and reporting perspective, but equally important is going to help you protect the organization, against fraud. And I know we, oftentimes don't like to talk about it very much because these are, you're talking about people you trust and people within your organization, but there is a responsibility to the company as a whole to do everything in your power to protect against any chance of fraud. As a controller, when you're in the trenches at an operational level, it's just going to give you that consistency. You're not, depending on institutional knowledge of, what goes where and, tracking things when someone leaves and trying to recreate the steps. It's going to, again, make your life a lot easier at the end of a month or year or quarter. And it's going to give you real-time visibility to what's going on with your payables. And if you are on the accounting team, if you're an AP specialist, whatever it may be, certainly it's going to make your life a lot easier. And in a lot of ways, what you're doing is you're moving from, again, data entry and things like that to more of a reviewer of the information, which is a huge help in terms of cutting down on errors versus trying to actually be entering the data and then on top of that, reviewing it as well. So that's a huge stress, hopefully, off your accounting team's back, because certainly there's nothing worse than them submitting a duplicate bill or making a duplicate payment or something along those lines, or paying the wrong amount. So again, to the idea of change, right? If it's not different, it can't be better. And so certainly you can, push your staff to, make some operational improvements, but to really move the needle, you've got to make a more significant change. And, we like to think of AP to some degree as the last frontier. Many of you may be automating things like your payroll and expenses and taxes and things of that nature. AP is, somewhat been the forgotten child, but the good news is that this is actually one of the larger opportunities for change, for improvement, for improvements to efficiency. So how do we go about managing that change? Well, it's a basic process of, do your research, select a solution, plan out what you're going to do to get it rolled out, and then, of course, execute. And, one of the things we'll get into shortly is, how to identify the areas that are costing you the most time and money. And certainly not all AP solutions or AP automation solutions are the same. And we'll review a little bit, the different types of products that are out there. MineralTree is an invoice to pay end-to-end solution. It covers the whole process from capturing an invoice all the way through the payment execution and pushing it back to your accounting system. Now, that, there's solutions out there that are document management. There's integrated payables from your bank and things like that. You may have even heard of certain procure-to-pay solutions. And so depending on where your greatest pain is obviously going to depend on the best solution for you. But, really zeroing in on what your biggest problem is going to be a huge part of the decision-making process. Obviously, make sure there's a clear plan and roles and dates. And, one of the things we focus on in particular here is in that initial rollout process and really holding your hand to ensure you get off to a good start, because that is critical in these scenarios. Lastly is, and I say this with a heavy heart, but there is no solution that's perfect, especially when you're talking about software and technology. But it is critical as you're executing and as you're rolling out, to really focus on, in the AP process, there's so many details. It's important to focus on the root of the challenges and not just, be too tied to your old process, although in a lot of ways you're going to want to maintain your process because that will make the change easier. But it's just to keep a view of kind of the bigger picture, what you're working on. Otherwise, you can sometimes get caught up in a lot of the little things that, you may have to make slight adjustments to in order to really be successful bringing automation into the mix. So when you think about savings, and this is really particular to the invoice to payment process, there's a couple things. I mean, oftentimes, we'll hear from our prospects, well, we're willing to spend the money if it makes sense. And so you've got to start with a baseline to know if it's going to make sense. And so what we'll do is we'll run through helping you determine, what invoice processing is actually costing you. We talked about some, industry, metrics and things like that, but we'll kind of delve into, helping you understand your specifics a little more, as well as on the payment processing side. And there's really kind of 4 components to the savings that you'll see. The first is, in terms of the invoice processing, and that's really around, the efficiencies of not having to, like I said, enter data and manually route approvals and manually code everything. And that's really more of a opportunity cost time savings. Then you have, and this is one where, we hear varying things in terms of early payment discounts. We have some clients who justify the entire purchase just based on early pay discounts, alone. We have other people say they may, it's not as much of an opportunity for them. But this I can tell you is, to go to a vendor and ask for a discount, good luck. Maybe, depending on certain circumstances, that may be helpful. But if you can come back with some leverage and you can come back to say, listen, instead of us paying you in 30 to 45 days, what if we were able to pay you in 10? What type of discount can we get? That's a real opportunity. And when you have a system and you automate your AP, with a solution like MineralTree, you have the ability to pay in 10 days very easily. And so you can go with confidence and know that you're going to be able to capture those discounts. Next is, in terms of the payment processing, simple economies of scale, for us to execute and actually send a check on your behalf, or an ACH, or a virtual card payment is certainly, we can do it at a much more cost-efficient, price point than most people can. And then, of course, we talk about rebates and rewards. We have a great commercial card program here that allows you to earn rebates from vendors that accept cards. So, a real opportunity to go on the offensive with your AP a little bit versus, just being on the defensive. And so, in a nutshell, it's simple, right? Your hard cost plus your, the cost of time plus, factoring in some cost of error. That's what it's costing for processing the invoice. And then in terms of the payments themselves, it's just a matter of hard costs plus the cost of time. And so, hopefully this slide isn't too dizzying. And for those that are interested, we've got an amazing value calculator that goes through a lot of this detail and will allow you to adjust it for your particular scenario. But, some just helpful tips right off the top is, in terms of understanding what your, hard costs are going to be around, and a lot of times people don't think of all these things, but, just storing the documents and things of that nature. One thing that we found helpful, it's really hard to estimate, time based on, a single invoice. And so what we found more helpful is to say, how much time does it take to do 100 invoices, and, get a better sense through that, and then, obviously back out of that number to figure out what it's costing you in total. But, ultimately it narrows or comes to, $12, in this particular case, just on the invoice processing side. And again, that falls right in the middle of, industry, research, which shows about $10 to $15, depending on, where you're at. Next is, the cost per check processed. Again, some of the hard costs here. And then really, estimating time spent based on the, 100 payments themselves. And so, you're factoring in things like, both your AP staff's time, as well as time that is taken by, a controller or CFO who may be manually handling checks and things of that nature. In this case, we come out to about $486, which is very in line with, what we see with most people. I would say best in class, we see, maybe $3 a payment, and upwards to 10, but I'd say on average it's right around 3 to 5 is what we're seeing from, our clients, as well as, what we're hearing from people in the market. And so, if you look at kind of just an example of a company, and, I didn't put the actual company here, but this is a real scenario for a client of ours today. They do about 3,000 invoices and payments. They get about a 1-to-1 ratio. That may vary. A lot of people we talk with have a 2-to-1 invoice to payment ratio. Originally, they were doing 80% of their payments by check, 20% by ACH, and their total spend is about $4.5 million. So again, the breakdown in terms of the savings, you can see on the bottom kind of what we're looking for in terms of that. And so in this scenario, just from an invoice automation perspective, and this is a net savings, by the way, we're actually factoring in some of the costs of MineralTree here as well. But, simple math, if you're doing 3,000 invoices, and on average it's costing you 10, and, by automating that process, you're bringing it down closer to 4, there's some really significant savings there. Early pay discounts, we're looking at industry average. I mean, you're talking about, 0.1485%, of that $4.5 million in terms of, expected early pay discounts. And again, this is all in the value calculator that we can provide for those that are interested at the end. You can see, where we get some of these numbers, but they're all obviously backed up by different research, as well as our own internal, research with our own customers. Then on the payment automation side, just in terms of check printing and things alone, you're looking at, again, significant savings going from, $4 a check down to, $1.75 or so is what it works out to, 50 cents for an ACH. Although ACH, if you're already doing it, you may not see quite as much savings there, obviously, because it's probably not costing that much. But even still, in this scenario of doing 3,000 payments, 80% of which were checks, you're still saving close to $6,000. And then lastly, in terms of rebates, our virtual card program actually has over 200,000 vendors that are already participating, but really anyone who's a MasterCard acceptor has the ability to be a part of the program. So really exciting opportunity, but even on the very conservative end, in this scenario, you're looking at, another $2,200 in savings. And so just to kind of bring it all back around, in the scenario with the 3,000 payments, 3,000 invoices, about $4.5 million in total spend, you're looking at a net, savings of about $21,250. And in many cases, depending on, which of these you're factoring in and things like that, I mean, we do see a return on investment, usually within a few months, quite frankly, in terms of what you're going to be saving. But again, a good portion of that is in terms of, time savings, which is why we come back to that, how are you spending the time that you're saving? So in terms of picking, the right type of solution, as much as certainly we hope that MineralTree is the right solution for everyone, we recognize that it may not be. If you look in the market and, certainly we understand, if you're looking more on the purchase requisition side, and that's really the element that you're trying to save, which is really more procurement. Unfortunately, MineralTree is not necessarily going to be helpful at this time. But really, people who are focused on the invoice to payment process is really where we come in to play. And so, there's a lot of adjacent products you'll see out there. There's document management where, they can capture the documents to some degree and they can store the documents, but certainly it doesn't take it past there in terms of payment authorizations and making the payments themselves. There's some other bill pay solutions out there that are really, they don't really do the invoice extraction the same way that we do or execute the payments the same way. And certainly you may have heard of integrated payable solutions from your bank where you're sending them a file. But, that's obviously very limited and there's all sorts of, security concerns there in terms of if you are, just as an example, if you have someone uploading a file, there's a point where you're losing control because that person could alter the file. But the point being that, we are focused on the invoice to payment process. We've kind of worked our way up the line, and so I certainly don't want to sell on any futures, but, where you can expect us to head is, focus on invoice to pay and then, moving up this line over time. But again, I don't want to sell on futures, but just give you a sense of, where MineralTree is headed. So in terms of finding that right product, I'd say obviously making sure that it's purpose-built to really address your specific need. GP in particular, I would say, you've got to make sure that it works well with the GP workflow. It is, a bit unique in the way that, you're doing batching and things like that. And, many of our GP customers prefer to actually code and approve the invoices prior to entering them into GP, which, our process and our product does support. Also, in terms of lowering the barrier to getting going, I think it's incredibly important that you find a solution that's flexible enough where you're not going to have to completely change your process. If you've got invoices coming in to maybe different department heads and they forward it in, you don't want to have to, stop that completely and say everything has to come into a central AP. With our solution, you can do both, but the point being you got to just make sure that it's not going to make you do wholesale changes to your entire process because that's obviously going to be a lot more of a challenge. And lastly, you need something that can scale with you and then will allow you to continue to evolve your process. I think one of the really nice things about MineralTree is, we can step into your current process very easily, but if you do want to move more in the direction of centralizing more and automating even more and setting up default coding and default approvers and things like that, there's a lot of ability to grow with the product as you grow. And lastly, in terms of a clear plan, like I said, there's a huge emphasis at MineralTree in terms of getting people off to a good start. And so, we've got a very thorough project planning process, and, and then from there, we're taking it all the way through the implementation and training and, ensuring that we have everyone signing off and, you're in a good place by the end of the implementation and you're getting the value that, you anticipated, when initially signing up. So in terms of what the ultimate outcome is, going from, that kind of ad hoc, riskier process, this is where you end up is automating, capturing the invoices themselves, being able to route those invoices for approval automatically, being able to do some of the coding on those invoices automatically based on different coding and things like that. Also, you've got a firm segregation of duties to ensure you're not risking any sort of internal fraud or online fraud for that matter. And then ultimately executing the payments on your behalf and pushing that information back to your Great Plains instance. So circling all the way back to, that initial question in terms of the why is, having the ability to spend time on more valuable things, early pay discounts, analysis, vendor management. A lot of times we hear people say that they're actually looking to automate their AP so they can spend more time collecting on the AR side. So that is, any of those things or anything that you can find that are more valuable for your people to do, more than data entry, that's, going to make a lot of sense, and you'll be able to execute on that. You'll also avoid, potentially additional hiring if need be. The big thing, again, people don't like to talk about it, but having greater protection against fraud is not only, a duty of the people within the accounting department, but it is certainly a responsibility. And it's going to make your life easier when you're talking about ending quarters, years, things like that. And last, but certainly not least, I'll throw this in there, and I say step outside the efficiency glass house. Oftentimes, the accounting department and the CFO in particular now is taking on a greater role in terms of operational efficiencies. But certainly, if you're going to be pushing on the other departments to improve what they're doing and to be more cost efficient and things like that, certainly it's good to have your own house well in order to give you that leg to stand on. So I do thank you for your time, and now on to the show. We'll just do a quick demonstration of the product itself.
What I'm going to do here is, as Mike said, just walk us through the process in MineralTree, and we're going to go through the 4 major steps that Mike identified earlier, starting with invoice capture and automated data extraction, then on to invoice approval, and then finally, in a separate side of the application to maintain true segregation of duties, we're going to run through what payment approval and payment execution look like in the system. So right now, we're just looking at the dashboard of what we call the Accounting Manager application. And as an accounting manager, I'm going to be responsible for these invoices as they come in and are captured, routed for approval, posted back to GP, and then finally selected for payment. Here on this main screen, there's a couple of major things that command my attention. The first one on the top right, you can see this MS Dynamics GP icon here, just letting me know that I'm currently connected to my GP file, and this means that data is flowing back and forth between the two in real time. Invoices that are posted from MineralTree will sync back to GP. Same thing with payments, and similarly, anything that I edit or post in GP is going to sync into MineralTree. So the name of the game is about eliminating any possible dual data entry that you might have to do otherwise. On that note, in the top left, I have a view both into my general ledger cache, this checkbook balance syncing over continuously from GP, and I can also display my bank cache through a connection directly with my bank. So I can pull that over as well, so I can compare the two side to side. And then below that, I just have a standard aging graphic, which gives me a sense of the urgency of my outstanding payables. And I can drill down under these categories, or I can just jump over the invoices screen and take a look at all of my open bills here. So in line, you're going to see some pretty standard information, vendors, amounts, due dates, invoice numbers. There's going to be some MineralTree specific fields as well, such as whether a document is present and the status of any invoice approval request, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But taking it from the top of the process here, there's 2 ways that these invoices can be created in MineralTree. One, of course, something can always be entered and posted in GP, and it'll sync over ready for payment within MineralTree. But more likely than not, users are going to want to take advantage of our automated data capture. And to kick this off, you just send an invoice image into the system, an original document, either as a PDF or other file format. That can be emailed directly to MineralTree by customers or vendors. And of course, you can always just upload it directly to the system as well. Either way, we're going to be able to extract things like the vendor name, the invoice number, dates, the total amount, and you'll notice that we'll also generate a line item for every line item on the original invoice itself. Some fields, such as the account, AP account and terms, are also auto-populated here, and that's because of some defaults I've set up at the vendor level as well. So at this point, as the accounting manager, all that remains for me to do is review the information, add any additional coding that I might need to, and then I can decide whether I want to post this back to GP right away, or I can obtain approval on this first. And these invoice approvers can also make changes if I allow them to as well. So if I want to get this finalized, someone needs to review this, give their okay, and update the coding. I can send it out to them by putting their email address in here and just hitting save. It's going to route an invoice approval request to them via email. They have the ability to approve that right from the email itself, or they can also log into a light application and review things in a little more detail. So again, this is separate from the final payment approval step we'll see. It's with this invoice approval that we really are getting at the idea of a departmental or managerial review before something can even be posted back to GP in all likelihood. And I can see some feedback here letting me know that I now have an invoice approval request pending for this invoice. Below that, you can see that there's 3 that have been approved and 1 in red that's been rejected. I entered that right from the invoice approval screen. I sent that out sort of ad hoc, but you can also automate this a little more by setting up company rules for invoice approval routing and setting default invoice approvers for different vendors. So ideally, when my invoices are coming in and being captured, they're being sent to the right individual without me having to intervene in between as the accounting manager. Now when things are approved and posted and ready to pay, I'm ready to sort of kick off the next part of the process. So I might want to just filter down and take a look at my invoices that are ready to be paid. I can do this right from the main screen, or I can use these filters to help me get to what I'm interested in. And so I'll go ahead and just add all of these to the payment queue on the right. This is going to give me a couple additional options. I can edit the amount if I want to make a partial payment against this invoice. And I'm also going to have the opportunity to decide on a payment date here. By default, not set. We're just going to send this out as soon as it's approved, but we also give you the ability to schedule payments to go out at some future date. I'll just go through the final confirmation step before we sort of pass this over to the payment authorizer. And again, we'll just double check the payment date and also the account that I'm paying these from and the payment type. So I'll submit these, and now my work as the accounting manager role is going to be finished, and it's going to be up to the payment authorizer, usually someone like a CFO or a controller, the person who might be used to signing checks in a more traditional process, who's going to have the ability to review these payments and sign off before they actually go out the door. And you'll notice I'm actually logging in with a separate user here, and it's triggered a 2-factor code that I have set up. So the 6-digit number was just texted to my phone, and I'll have to put that in before I can get into the application. An optional feature, but definitely something that we highly recommend to all our customers as an extra layer of protection against fraud. So from this dashboard, you'll recognize the layout, the account information in the top left. But instead of the aging graphic, I now have this wheel, which is simply just showing me everything that requires my attention. And right now, we just have 4 payments awaiting my approval. So I'll drill down and take a look at those. You'll recognize 3 of them here, and there's one already waiting for me. So if something is a regular expense that I recognize, maybe it's a utility bill that I'm used to paying, used to seeing, I can always approve things right from this screen if I want to save time.
but I'm also going to have access to the same level of detail that invoice approvers and accounting managers had earlier on in the process. So if I drill down into the vendor here, I can take a look at all my payments in line here and review in more detail what the information on this particular payment is, a history of recent payments to this vendor, and then scrolling down, I can also take a look at the invoice details. And this includes the status of any invoice approval requests, the different line items, and how they're coded. And I can even bring up the original invoice image if I wanted to review this before I actually okay this payment. If everything looks all right, I can go ahead and approve. It's going to move me to the next one in the queue and keep moving down the line here. If I see, an issue, I'll also obviously have the ability to reject this payment, and it's just going to prompt me to explain why. So my accounting managers know what they need to fix before resubmitting it to me for approval. When I've approved everything I'm interested in right now, I can go ahead and just confirm these. And after one more glance at my GL cache, I can go ahead and submit these for payment. And my work is finished. MineralTree handles everything when it comes to the actual payment execution and syncing of data back and forth. So sort of break it down for checks. Anything approved today will go out via first-class mail the next day to my vendors. If it's an electronic payment, whether that be card or ACH or something else, it's a similar story, except we are generating the electronic payment file and sending it off for processing the same day. We never make use of a settlement account, drawing money from your account and putting it in one of ours until the payment's made. We don't do this to institute delays and cause problems for folks. So everything's going to be drawn directly on your account. Those checks will have your microline information, your business's name, and account numbers on them. So they'll function just like any other check. And when those payments go out, we'll also have the ability to send out remittance via email to vendors so they know what they're being paid for and why. It'll list all the invoice numbers for their reference, particularly helpful for ACH and other electronic payment types where they might not have the benefit of a check stub to go off of when they're applying those payments. And then also on the GP integration side, obviously at this point, we're going to sync those payments back into GP as a batch, closing the loop data-wise and ensuring that you have a complete record in both GP and MineralTree. And just one last thing to mention by way of conclusion here. We've seen a lot of our security features at work here. We've seen invoice approval, segregated payment approvals, two-factor codes at work. And to top it off, for everyone who makes use of one of those two-factor codes, we do provide a $100,000 guarantee against any fraud on our customers' accounts. So that sums up what a typical workflow looks like in MineralTree. Mike and I are just going to turn things over to some questions for the remainder of our time here.
All right, thanks, Andrew. And I wanted to just ask folks in the audience to present their questions here. You can use the Q&A block on the right side of the main webcast window. Well, I'm not actually seeing any questions at this time. I do want to just remind folks about one other detail. We do have a survey that'll pop up after today's event, so please do be on the lookout for that after the session today. Do you have contact information you want to put up if people do have questions after the event? Maybe we put up a slide for that. We do have a question that came in. So did you say MineralTree works with POs and item numbers and inventory entries instead of just simple transactions using GL distributions only?
We didn't speak to that in particular. I just want to make sure I understand the question.
Do you want me to repeat it?
Yeah, if you could, that'd be great.
So I guess the question is, I'll try to rephrase it slightly. Does MineralTree work with POs and item numbers or inventory entries instead of simple transactions using GL distributions?
Yeah, so I mean, if you are using, POs, we don't, I guess the simple answer is we don't do PO matching specifically. You would follow your same process in that circumstance where but we would be able to help, with all the coding aspects, all the GL coding.
So we do have customers who utilize PO workflows. As Mike sort of graphic earlier illustrated, the PO matching doesn't fall directly into our wheelhouse today, but we do have a lot of customers who carry out their typical PO workflows in GP and rely on MineralTree for payment processing.
All right, another question here. How long does it normally take from planning to being up and running?
So the nice thing is that's actually a very, streamlined, quick process. And typically we'll work with your GP consultant just on a couple small things. So, the long and short of it is we can have you up and running in a couple days, depending on, which payment types you're going to be doing and your bank and some other kind of varying factors. We can get you up and running, cutting checks in a matter of days. ACH and virtual card sometimes takes, a week or two more to get up and running.
All right. Another question here, and I'll make a last call for questions. But do you process international payments?
So at the moment, we don't process international wires, although we do have that on the plan for the second half of the year. You do have the ability to send a check internationally, but obviously there's some, challenges in terms of that.
Okay. How do you transfer the data from flat PDF invoices or paper to data being input in the system as we saw in the demo?
Yep. So that is actually done through a combination of both technology as well as human intervention, which is critical in terms of getting an accurate reading. Some people may have experience with some other OCR technology where maybe you're getting 80% accurate data. Our data, you're looking at 99.5% accuracy, and that is because of the combination of technology as well as human intervention. And so the way it actually works is, when you send something into the system, up until 6 p.m. On a given day, you'll get it back. It'll be in the system and all entered by 8 a.m. the next day.
Great. Well, it looks like we're at the end of our question queue, so we can start wrapping up. Mike, Andrew, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Yeah, thank you very much for everyone's time. And, if anyone has certainly questions, hopefully everyone can see the contact information. Or if anyone's interested in a more detailed, value calculator to calculate their specific costs and potential savings, we can help them with that as well.
All right, excellent. Well, with that, we're going to wrap up here. I'm actually going to put up that slide that has your email address, Mike. And we're going to end the event. Thanks again, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Thanks.